Alright, hi again. I'm going to try and film sort of a part 2 for how I releather wrestling belts. Mainly because I have one on the table that I'm doing right now. And I thought I'm sort of midway through it. And I'm right at the stage where I left off last time. So anyway, this is a spinner. This is a fig spinner. I've got the larger holes that we discussed. So where we left off in the last video, we have a hunk of leather that's been cut out with some holes in it. So the next step is drawing lines. Okay, and drawing your lines is the most important part. If you get your lines crooked, it'll look terrible. If they're off by even a millimeter, I'm Canadian, so it's a millimeter. If they're off even by a millimeter, you will notice it. So on this belt, I've already drawn the lines. So remember, we left off with a strap that was just a hunk of leather with nothing on it. Okay, now there's drawing your lines. There's a couple different ways of doing it. If it's a dyed strap, I just use a plain, there it is, plain black felt tip pen. And I use a ruler. Very, very important. Get a longer one. It's better. And I use a square. I got this from the dollar store. It works wonderfully. And you draw your lines on. The angles of these things are different depending on who's doing it. I'm not going to give you all the exact measurements now. It would take forever, depending on whose belt you're doing. So this is a J-Mar because it's a spinner. But if you're doing a Milliken or a different belt, the angles and measurements here are different. I'll leave that up to you to find out specifically what the actual numbers are. But one thing that's very important, if this measurement here, from here to here, is an inch, this needs to be exactly an inch. If this measurement from here to here is 3/4, which it is, this one here is 3/4, you need to make sure that it is exact. If it's off even by the slightest bit, you're dinged. Okay? So as you can see on this one, I've already drawn the lines. Now, some of the time, the first step is drawing the lines onto the pen. Now, you'll notice there's another line here, goes along at the bottom, that is, you can kind of see it, it's a groove, but I haven't actually drawn it on. And that's because I used this tool. This is a little spoon tool you can buy from a leather store. And I traced it along a ruler. This is what you have to do with all of them. Okay, and the reason I say that is because, so this is my big secret. I don't swivel cut. Most of the guys who do these releathers, and any leather guy will tell you, what they do is they'll take these drawn lines that are here, and they'll use something called a swivel knife. This is a swivel knife, okay? Now, what they'll do is they'll draw these lines on with pen, so the grooved one there too, everything's drawn on in pen first, and then they'll cut their lines with a swivel knife. Now, this is a really super duper expensive blade I got in here, and I tried this like hell. I could never get it to work. One of my friends, who's really good at leather work, not at releathering, does all kinds of intricate patterns with these things, and you have to use this if you're doing a really intricate pattern. One of the things I discovered for myself, if I don't use this, I don't actually cut the leather, I just groove it with this. If you're doing straight lines, it makes the world of difference. On a replica belt, there's a whole lot of straight lines. They got to be exactly parallel, and if they're not, they look like shit. Okay, so I use this. Stopped a lot of the wobbling. This made the world of difference for me. So instead of going over all of my lines with this thing, cutting the actual leather, I just groove it. So I'll take a ruler, drawn line or not. This one I didn't actually draw the line first. I just used the ruler and traced this along. Either way, every single line that you have here needs to be grooved. Okay, with something like this. Okay, and the reason for that is because you have to bevel all these lines. Beveling is the most difficult part to master, and one of the reasons is because, so you've got your grooved line here. This is a beveler, okay, and what you do is you take the beveler, you put it in your grooved line, and you tap it with a mallet or a hammer. Now there's a few different ones you can use. This is a cheapie I got from Tandy Leather. You can get them for like 15 bucks Canadian, I think, so, or I don't know, it's cheap. And then this is one that costs about 150, I think I paid for this, American. It's all personal preference. I've seen some of the best releatherers in the entire world use the cheapie. I've watched this, and it works fine. So it's all personal preference. Either way, and this is practice before you releather your first belt. Before you do any of that, grab some scrap pieces of leather, draw some lines on with your swivel knife, or with the spoon thing that I use, and practice beveling in a straight line. I spent hours doing that. So you put the big end in there, and you tap all the way along. Okay, now I do double beveling with mine. What that means is that this little ridge here follows the line. So I bevel it this way, okay? And sometimes you have to go over it twice. Keep it straight. Don't do this, or you'll get a line that's all wonky. And then I bevel it back the other way. So you've got kind of like a V channel. You understand what I mean? You've got... Why did I just ask you if you understand what I mean? You can't answer. Christ, I'm tired. Yeah, so you bevel this way, and then you turn around, and you bevel back the other way, and you go all the way along. Okay? Like I said, practice, 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 right? Takes forever to get it down, especially with straight lines. Now, this beveler is my favorite. I love this beveler. If I ever lost it, I'd lose my mind because, well, I wouldn't literally lose my mind, but this is an old one. This was discontinued. Each beveler has its own little number on the side. This one is 970. Okay, and each beveler has its own number. This is discontinued back in the 60s. Bevelers are all personal preference. This is my kit. Look at all the bevelers I got along the back. I got textured ones, leave a little pattern. I got smooth ones. This is my favorite. This is a larger version of the same one. Some of these you have to get off eBay. You can't just walk into a leather store. I bought a ton of them. There's even more. There's a couple more over here in my little trough there. It's all personal preference. I love that one. I know other people who use some of these more narrow ones here. Okay, it's all personal preference. But the key thing to beveling is practice, 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 practice. So once you've beveled all that, that is to say, once you've gone over all these lines, once you've gone over all these lines, with a beveler, it's going to look something, like this. Okay, this is a good example of a fuck up. There, I fucked up. You can actually hide that if you bevel back the other way and smooth it over. Be fine. One thing I forgot to mention, before you bevel, so once you've got your lines spooned in, okay, a lot of guys wet the leather. Now, with drawing straight lines, this is really important. Okay, you always wet the back. I soak the back. But for years, I used to soak the front too, okay, and then I would just start beveling right away. And the problem is when the leather is wet, if you're beveling, it's going to go, it's like mushy. It's hard to explain, but your line's going to go all wonky. I know we've all seen pictures of that. So to be clear, what I do, I always wet the back, and sometimes I'll just bevel the front dry. I get a better result. Sometimes I'll wet it really, really, just lightly, and then leave it. Just walk away for 10 minutes. Then do your beveling. Okay, the wetter the bottom of the leather is, the deeper the impression is going to be. Okay, if you don't wet it at all, it's not deep enough. So once you've got it, like I said, once you've got it actually beveled, this is kind of what it looks like. Now, the funny thing is, if you have, you see the lines are a lot more pronounced here. I stopped about here. These are still the spooned lines. But the lines are a lot more pronounced here. The funny thing is that if I have any screw-ups in here, okay, you don't really notice them until you put dye on it. If there are screw-ups, once you put dye on this, it looks awful. It's the funniest thing. So one of the things I figured out is if you take your strap, your piece of leather, sorry about all the cords, and you hold it up while it's dry to a light. Now, my workshop is a mess. You can see all the little imperfections. The light reflects off them. Okay, I have tons of lights on my ceiling. Right? You can see all the little imperfections. So you can bring it back down and correct them with your beveler or your bevelers, however many you're using. Okay? Now, the other thing about beveling, you got to have a good solid surface underneath. If you try and bevel, this is my other workbench. God, my workshop looks like hell. With rubber wheels on a rubber floor and a wood top, it won't work. And the reason I say it won't work is because you won't see it, but the table actually bounces. Okay, so this one here is rooted to a cement floor, this one. And I sunk in, I do some woodworking too, so I sunk in, right, it's flush, a giant slab of granite I got for next to nothing. Now, you don't need to sink anything in, really. I've got tons of extra little pieces of granite. If you go to a flooring or a countertop store, they'll give you these things for like pennies, right? But you have to do your beveling on something good and solid. Typically a piece of stone, granite of some sort, okay? Oh, and the other thing, remember how I said you got to use one of these mallets? Don't try and use a hammer. The reason I tell you not to try and use a hammer, you'll fuck up your piece of leather, it'll go all bleh, and you will mess up your tools. Okay? So that's drawing your lines and beveling. Next we're going to do the texturing of the snap boxes and the edges. Just one thing before we get to texturing the snap boxes. I covered how to spoon these lines and everything, but how do you do these ones? So if you're doing a belt with a lot of straight lines, which is actually most of them, I just use a ruler. Use a ruler and use your spoon tool. Okay, this little thing here. Right? Now, if you're doing one like this with a giant swooping curve, obviously you can't use a flat ruler. This little spoon tool comes with an arm. And what you do is you follow, be very careful, because if you go like this even the slightest bit, as you can see I've done here, you have to fix it. So you follow the edge of the leather with the little arm, and you use the spoon to engrave along it. Okay? Oh, yeah. See, I'm not actually going to do it because I've already done it. But this, you can gauge your own depth. But that's how you draw the spoon line all the way with the groove that your beveler will follow eventually. Alrighty, so once you've got your lines all beveled, that takes hours and hours and hours and hours. Okay, you want to work on your snap boxes and you want to work on your border. Okay, so this is it takes the longest, this one line beveling all the way around the belt. Like I said, I do both ways. And then you want to do your stamp. This is actually the easiest part of the whole thing in my opinion, but it actually pops the most. That's the most ironic thing. Okay, so I use, there's a few different tools you can use for your border. This is a J-Mar, so I'm using a J-Mar shell tool. Okay, then there's a Milliken shell tool. That's our Midwest, whatever you want to call it. And then there is the, please excuse my shitty camera work, custom made one. I got this on eBay, the WWE Champion. That's for the side of the Undisputed, and I think they use it on a couple others. That's for the border there. Okay, so as you can see, I've already done the border stamp all the way along this one. You just follow the bevel, and you're going to smack the bejesus out of it. Okay, so basically what you do, you use your sponge and water. Okay, you wet the back and you wet the front. Now this is different from the beveling. When you're doing beveling, you don't want it to be soaking wet, right? Because you want to follow a straight line. With these, you do want it to be much wetter. Okay, so you douse the back. Okay, and then the front, I do a little section. And then, bop, bop, bop all the way along. Okay, now with these ones, with the bevel, you have to tap, tap, tap really lightly. Again, you'll get the feel of it once you practice. But with these, you have to actually smash the hell out of it. Okay, and by that I mean you put it in the spot, and you tap it a couple times so that it won't wobble. Because if you hit it and then you hit it again and you move it in between the two even slightly, it'll look awful. Okay, so you put it in the spot you want it, you tap it, just so there's an imprint, and then you slam it. Okay, and I use something a little heavier. I use my maul for that. This big guy here. Actually, that's kind of little, but he's very heavy. It's very heavy. And it makes an impression. And like I said, oddly enough, this is the part of the belt that is the easiest. You just rip, rip, rip all the way along. But it stands out the most, in my opinion, more than anything else. So as you can see, I've done this side. And now I'm going to do this side. So again, you just start... You wet it first, start along here, tap, and then pound, 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 and make the pattern sort of line up. Alrighty, so we did the border here, and we did the border here, so it goes all the way around. A couple steps left before we dye this bitch. Look here, so here, this, for those of you who are belt marks, this is wrong. You know that. There's, J-Mar actually has a custom stamp that goes along here. I do not have that custom stamp. I've never had it made, so I've always kind of just improvised my own with a series of tools that I have. I did the same thing on both sides here. With a series of tools that I have. But you can do whatever you like. You can even leave it blank, whatever you want. Now, the last thing is going to be the snap boxes texturing. This is really tedious stuff. But if you remember, so you bevel the line all the way along here, going both ways. Okay, so there's the V there. So there is like you can't really see it here. I don't know, but there is a little lip right here. Okay, it kind of like a picture frame border. When you bevel, when you use your texture for this. Okay, now this is a J-Mar one. Milliken has a different one. Okay, the Midwest is a different one. This is what I use. There's a ton of different ones. This is the one for the J-Mar. It basically just makes it like a ripple effect. And what you do is you find the flattest edge along here, and you run it along not your line, but your beveled part. So there is a little border all the way around. Okay, because if you run along your line, you're going to miss one and go, and then the whole thing's going to be fucking garbage. So, or ugly, whichever you prefer. Pardon my language, by the way. So anyway, you're going to go all the way along here and leave a little bit of space. Okay? Now, that's a little bit different than with a Milliken, or a Midwest, pardon me. With a Midwest, you're going to use, well, there's a couple different ones that you can use. I use this one. Little pear shaped thing. So that's a little different. With this one, the big one, you more or less just smash your way around in kind of a random pattern, and you make sure that it's all uniform in terms of the depression. With the Milliken, with the Midwest tool, the pear, what you want to do is you want to start this way and do like a line all the way around. So you tap, 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 tap. So you have like a kind of like a border. You're making a border with this, and then the middle is a bunch of random, like it'll look like a bunch of fallen leaves when you're done. One thing I want to stress here, no matter which one you use, make sure that the pressure you apply is uniform. If you bash the shit out of it over here, and then you tap like lightly over here because you realize this is too hard, it won't look right. Okay, it will look. This will be way too imprinted, and this one will be way too light. You may also notice that I have no holes here for my snaps yet. There's a reason for that. If I put the holes in here now and then I wet this and I use the texture tool, the holes will move. This whole piece of leather, especially if you hit it really hard, will go kind of like in a cupping motion. So if I put all the holes in here and then I hit it with this, you're going to wind up with some of the holes where you hit it harder have moved. So what I always do is I do the texturing first, make sure it's uniform, and then put my holes in after, and I'll show you how to do that. So make sure that it's uniform all the way around. You're hitting the amount of pressure with each one, and you don't drill the holes until afterwards, no matter which one you're doing. So I'm going to do that for these two ends, and then we'll do the last step before dyeing. So just real quick, normally what I do, even with the heavy-duty textured border, is I do kind of around the edges first and try and keep it equidistant from the beveled line there, and then I fill in the middle with sort of randomness. It just makes it easier to, that way you're not tooling randomly close to a beveled edge, because it's really easy to go over. Alright, so we've finished our texturing, and you sort of see this is what you get. The dye will absorb it evenly, so it'll be a nice even sort of textured pattern there. And I've punched the holes already. Now, one of the things you'll notice about bootlegs, the number one complaint about them, and this is a really hard thing to get, the only thing in my opinion that's harder is the hand beveling, the straight line, is getting these holes to line up. It's a lot harder than you'd think. If one's out by even like 1/8 of an inch, less than like 1/16 of an inch, a millimeter, put it that way, it looks horrible. It looks all wonky. And that's the number one complaint I see about boots. And the reason is it's really hard to do. Now, I used to do all kinds of things with a ruler where I would plot out my lines. They're exactly 1 inch in and exactly 1 inch apart to the center. Seems simple, it's actually not. I stopped doing it with the ruler a long time ago, and I just started using a template that I made. I made this with a drill press, and it works perfect every time. I'm not going to go through sort of in detail how I made it, because it would take too long. It was really complicated, but as long as this is perfect, then this underneath will line up just fine. So I poked my holes, and there's two more things to do before we put the dye on it. Sorry, one thing I forgot to mention, when I actually punch these holes, I put this over top, and then I use the correct hole punch size is 5/32 of an inch. Yep, there it is, number 4 from Tandy Leather. So what I do is I put it over here, I'll put this through, and I'll press down. These holes are slightly larger. I'll press down once I've got it all lined up, and what I get is a whole bunch of circle silhouettes. Okay, and then I put it on top of this. I've just got a poly cheapy cutting board from Walmart. And you put it, line it up with your hole where you had it, and you pound the snot out of it. You really give it a good whack or a couple, and it'll go right through and punch it. People have asked if you can use a drill press for this before, or a drill. I mean, I've tried it. It doesn't leave a pretty hole. This is nice and clean. The other one kind of pushes it down, then pulls it back up. Drills aren't meant for leather. So I would advise using a punch for those. The last step, 2 steps actually, are beveling and burnishing your edges. This is before we dye. So you'll notice that this edge here kind of is already, it's got like a rounded to it. When you start it, I've already done that, sorry. It looks like this. See? It's just a flat piece of leather. And if you dye it like that, you're going to have a flat edge. You don't want that. So what you have to do instead is get yourself an edge beveler. You can get these for relatively cheap. This is a fancy dancy one. This was like 60 bucks Canadian. I don't know what that is US. $5. Anyway, and you take it along the edge of the belt you have that you're doing, okay? And basically what it does is it trims a little bit off the edge, like that, see? Nice steady hand, go all the way around. So it creates kind of like an extra surface, okay? And you got to go all the way around the belt, front and back. Okay, so you don't have a flat surface here anymore. You've got one that's beveled on both sides. And then you take what's called a burnishing wheel. Okay, and you burnish the snot out of it. That involves putting it here and rubbing it like that forever. You can wet it, it helps, and it'll make this edge really slick and really smooth and round it over. I've already done both sides beveled and one burnishing here. I'm going to do one more before I dye it. There's a little bump there, you can take that out later. But yeah, so you want to go all the way around with the wheel, good few times, and go at it all the way around the whole belt. Okay, and that's going to make your edge nice and smooth. Okay, so that brings us to the next step, which is dyeing the belt itself. I'm going to cut this video short because it's way too friggin' long. And I'm going to do part 3 will be like, I don't know, dyeing, finishing, snaps, and backing maybe, if I can get it all in. Anyway, that's the hardest part, in my opinion, is the beveling, and drawing your lines, and then also cutting the holes for the snap. So that brings us up to dyeing. So we've got pretty much a finished strap here. The hole in the middle is just because it's a spinner. No other belt has that. Yeah, so I'm going to dye this in the next video. I'll post it, I don't know when. I'll post a video where I explain how to dye it, how to finish it, all that fun stuff. But yeah, that brings us right up to sort of the final stages right before we're going to dye the strap. Again, thanks for watching, and hopefully somebody found this helpful.